Welcome to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, the podcast that makes time and space to think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, anything of interest to time poor but enthusiasm rich primary teachers. This week, it brings me tremendous pleasure to introduce today's episode, an interview with the one and only Aidan Severs. During our chat, we discuss Aidan's blog writing process, the role social media plays in education, subject leadership, and much, much more. If you enjoy this episode, and I know you will, then please leave a review wherever you are listening now. That's enough from me. Without further ado, let's spend some time thinking deeply about primary education. So this week, I'm delighted to be joined by Aidan Severs. It's great to have you here, Aidan. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. It's you've kept me company on many a journey. So I'm almost real life, online.
That's an absolute pleasure. Now, we always begin with our guests in numbers to get a feel for who they are. So my first question to you is years as a teacher.
Okay, so that was 15 full years. I did a little bit extra.
Years as a deputy head teacher?
So that was 3 full years as a deputy.
Blog posts published?
Now, these are the ones where it gets a little bit iffy. I reckon it's just over 400. So that includes a fair few book reviews and things like that as well. But it's somewhere around that number.
That's amazing. Some dedication needed. What about blog post views?
Again, it's a fairly rough number. So on my old blog, which ended up being called thatboycanteach.co.uk, which is still up and still gets hundreds of visits a day, I think, through Google. The number on that is over 1,600,000. And then I can't find the figure for my current blog, which I've had since maybe September last year. But it looks like it's around 35,000, but I'm not sure if that's whole site views or just the blog.
That's amazing.
I don't know how it compares, to be honest. I don't know what other people's are at all.
No, I mean, yeah, with 400 posts, over 1 million views, pushing 2 million probably. Yeah, I think that's a blog that people have found very interesting and very useful, I reckon.
Hopefully.
Most important year group?
Oh, surely no one gives a straight answer to this one. I was thinking about it, and I kind of kept pushing myself down and down and down until I got to early years and thought, so much of what goes on in the early years has such an impact on what happens later, with the gap only growing seemingly between early years and later. And so I know that children come in at early years with different starting points, but it would seem that the more you can do at that younger age to address that, then the better chances those children have. So although I've never taught there, never been a specialist in that age, I do think so much hinges on what happens in that year.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me, and I think it's quite a popular answer. So I'm totally with you. What about your favourite year group?
Well, I've got to say year 6. I trained in Key Stage 1, but I was given a job in year 3 as an NQT, and then I only ever went up the school after that, to the point where I'd done 3, 4 and 5, and I kind of needed 6 to complete the set. So at that school at that time, I said, please, can I go into year 6? There's wisdom and folly in that, I think. But I think once you are a year 6 teacher, you often kind of get typecast as a year 6 teacher. So I've spent a fair bit of time teaching year 6, and I do love it, despite the pressures. I guess I kind of like the older age and you can be a bit more sarcastic with them and so on. And some good discussions and things happen up in year 6. So I would definitely say year 6 is my favourite.
Yeah, I know what you mean about being typecast. There's a lot of operational knowledge that's very specific to that year group, and if someone has to learn it from scratch every year,
Yeah,
it's making life more difficult.
yeah, I mean, the two things I guess would be, how do you do SATs logistically, and do you know particularly all the maths and maybe the grammar stuff that you need to know to be able to teach it well. Can be a bit daunting, I think.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about in the podcast before how to navigate those moderation situations as well, because there's an art to it. It sort of makes it easy as possible.
Yeah, and it feels very personal, doesn't it, as well, that this is me being judged rather than the culmination of a whole time spent in school.
Yeah, yeah. And then the big one, tweets.
I had to, as you saw, ask how to find this out. But yeah, 78.6k, so somewhere in the region of that.
Wow, that's amazing.
And again, I don't know how that compares to other people.
Is the second highest. I think Steph Elliott had over 100,000 in season 3.
Right, okay, yeah. That computes definitely.
But it ranges from 1,000 to 100,000, so anywhere in between, I think I'm around 10, 11,000. Right. So
okay, yeah, I had a very active few years. I definitely think most of those occurred then. I don't think it's so regular this at the moment.
You'd be surprised how many people ask me how to find. Like Matt did it during the recording, and whenever I first interviewed him.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and he was like, "Okay, let's stop the whole process so we can find out how many tweets I've done."
Well, I'm glad I did my little bit of prep.
Yeah, you're the first person brave enough to ask online in advance. So, Aidan, you're a teacher, subject leader, school leader, and most recently an education consultant. Tell us about your journey and how you got here.
Okay. Yeah, well, I guess all of those things I have been, at least in the past. I think whether I'd call myself them now, whether I'm allowed to call myself them now, I'm not sure. I know that I've kind of put myself in this position of no longer having the voice of somebody who works in schools, and I kind of appreciate that means there are certain things I can say and can't say. But in terms of my journey, I have been all those things in the past. So I think my journey probably starts when I was in sixth form and I didn't have a clue what I should do at uni. And family friends kind of said to me, "Oh, you're pretty good with kids. Why don't you be a teacher?" I was the eldest of 5, so I was fairly used to, I think, being quite helpful with younger kids. So really, because I didn't know what else to do, I started looking into unis where I could do a teaching course. At that time, it was the kind of popular thing was the 4-year course, degree plus teaching stuff on the side, which actually, when it happened, was way more teaching stuff with a subject on the side. So I went to uni, did the 4-year course. That was art. That was my kind of degree with primary teaching. Thankfully, kind of found out that I was fairly good at teaching, obviously as good as you ever are when you're training. Although, sometimes there are some absolutely smashing trainees and you think, how can you do this after such a short amount of time? It took me years. But yeah, I was all right. I did okay with it. Got a job. That was, as I said earlier, I went for a Key Stage 1 job because I'd specialised in Key Stage 1 teaching, I don't know, maybe for the third and fourth year of the degree or something we had to choose. And then got put into year 3. I guess they thought, well, it's not that different to year 2. So I got that job. And as I said, I only ever went up from there. So in that school, did my NQT year. Again, did all right. I wasn't setting the world alight with my teaching. Had a really amazing year group partner who was more experienced, very organised, and she kind of taught me a lot about the practicalities of getting stuff done so that it's efficient and effective, which is something that I've always tried to be ever since. So I did 3 years in year 3, a couple of years in year 5, that was all at the same school. During that time, as an RQT, I became art leader simply because, well, I suppose because I had the degree, but also the art leader retired at the end of my first year, so somebody needed to take it on. I did various bits of kind of what I feel like were quite tokenistic leadership roles in that school as well. I kept trying to apply for things like phase leadership, but I wasn't getting it. I moved to another school where there seemed to be a bit more promise. I became a year 4 teacher there, and during that time I did end up getting a few leadership roles. So I led on reading, I led on implementing the whole 2014 curriculum, and at the same time computing, particularly because it was a massive shift from the old kind of IT curriculum that we had. That's where I went into year 6. I did 2 years in year 6 there, or maybe 3. I think it was 2. I can't remember now. And it was then when I started to feel not, I could do this better in terms of leadership, but, I've started to develop ideas about how things could be done leadership-wise, and started looking for assistant headship positions, and I got one in a school that had just been put into special measures, and they were, I think the line on the advert was, "Join us on our journey to good." So they had this ambition to obviously turn the school around and to have that noticed by Ofsted. So I got that role there. It was upper key stage 2 lead, year 6 teacher, and maths lead as well. So took on all of that. Did that. We got the school to good within a couple of years, and that started to feel like, right, I did what I came here to do. At that point, so that was in the Dixon's Trust, and it wasn't for I think the first term I was there. They were kind of going through the process of academising. We became Dixon's. Yeah, I think my 4th year there, I went part-time, led lower key stage 2, and I went part-time as primary lead practitioner across the Dixon's Trust, so working with the 4 primary schools that Dixon's have in Bradford, on various projects, introducing instructional coaching, kind of teacher development roles, curriculum development, and kind of in one school where I was doing that curriculum development, it was kind of a helping hand. The head had left, the deputy had stepped up, but there was no deputy in place. And that's the school that I then, after that year, went and became deputy at. So at that school, they were a new primary attached to an existing secondary that had academised. They'd had a whole new building and a whole primary kind of wing added to it. So the school was growing year on year. When I first went doing 2 days a week, they were up to year 4. So that year I started as upper key stage 2 lead. We only had year 5, but it was brand new curriculum, brand new approach, and kind of not trying to reinvent the wheel, but trying to get everything in place so that we hit the ground running and we didn't have to rework things later on. So then became deputy there, year 5. We took them through year 6. Unfortunately, that was then when COVID hit, so we kind of didn't get to do that whole proper journey with them because it was a through school as well. We were really excited about the prospect of taking these children right the way through, and I mean, effectively we have, but COVID made that more difficult. We always kind of thought the SATS results are going to be proof of what we're doing here, and we never got them. Obviously, this year was the first year that we got those results, but I have since moved on. But I have heard about the results, and they were pleasing, so that was good to kind of find out that the work we'd put in over those few years had kind of come to fruition in that way. And then, at Christmas last year, I left and became kind of a self-appointed education consultant, and I've been doing that since January up till now. So I think that sums it up in a rather long-winded way.
How did you feel about not having a full Key Stage 2? Did you find that
you had more space to focus on the things you thought were important?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we literally had the physical space as well, which when we got a year six in, we had to kind of dial back what we were doing because we'd kind of luxuriated in the amount of physical space there was. But yeah, just having a year five cohort to start with meant that although I was kind of getting to know the school and stuff as well, it meant that, yeah, you could put all of your energies into making sure that those, because it was two new teachers, one NQT, one experienced, really great teacher, and me, and an experienced TA as well who knew the school kind of inside out. Yeah, it just meant that we could really focus on how we did that. But we always had in mind that this wasn't just year five, these were next year's year six children as well. And because I had a year six background, the other teacher had a year six background, I think it kind of sounds bad, but we almost saw it as year six minus one or whatever, rather than just year five. Because I think one of my frustrations in the past as a year six teacher has been, well, it's all right for anyone who's not year six because you don't have the pressure of the SATs and so on. So it was kind of the opportunity to bring some of that, not necessarily a difference in practice down to year five, but just that awareness of what the end goal is in terms of SATs. It sounds like I'm just obsessed with SATs, but they're just an inevitability. They're there. And my view is that, you know, to serve the children well, they need to be well prepared for it. So yeah, it allowed us to think more holistically about upper key stage 2, I think, before thinking, right, what's happening in year 6. But going back to curriculum, it was the year 6 curriculum was planned during that year as well. So it wasn't like we got to the end of year 5 and then thought, what should we do next? And the curriculum development had been a bit like that. It had kind of been built year on year before I got there. So over my time there, I went back and kind of made tweaks and changes, especially to get that kind of sequential approach to it a bit more consistent.
I think you're right. There is a distinction between teaching pupils and making sure they're ready for national examinations. Like, you know, sometimes I think that disadvantaged pupils who don't do 11 plus prep at home, you know, when they see examinations, it's different. Yeah. It's more anxiety inducing. Yeah. I don't know if it's fair to say. So there is a part of our role is making sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that when they do inevitably meet that situation, they have to. So I can see where you're coming from.
Good.
I mean, not that you need my validation. We had something similar with the project that I've been doing for the last couple of years, and we were building up, and so this year's year 6, we're in year 4 when the pandemic sort of started. And at that point, they were doing so well that we thought that year 6 was going to be a breeze for them. And then obviously, you know, you don't have the opportunity to work with the pupils that you need to work with most. And, you know, things went really well in the end, but we had to work twice as hard once things start to reopen. So I can totally see where you're coming from on that.
Yeah.
So I think there are lots of things I'd like to ask you about. I think it makes sense to start chronologically with your blog, That Boy Can Teach, which, you know, as we've seen by any metric, was ultra successful and tremendously well received. Now, I think you also had a blog where you reviewed hip hop releases.
Yeah, it is.
So I think
you've got a while back.
I think you've got something. You know, you understand how to connect with people and how to get your message out there. But what do you think it was that brought readers to you?
I think first and foremost, blogs were fairly popular back then, and that helped. People wanted to read blogs. I think back then I really focused on writing things about being optimistic and positive and kind of practical stuff about making teaching work in terms of work-life balance and so on. And I think, although I'm not saying it was all well received, because there were some people who felt like it was unrealistic and that I should keep my ideas to myself. But I think by and large it was well received, because I was being positive and I was saying the good things about teaching, but also kind of trying to be realistic that it can be difficult, and trying to be practical about what the solutions might be. I think there were other things where I kind of tapped in to what people were thinking a lot about. So I can't remember if it was 2015 or 2016 when I started blogging about education, but it was certainly not long before we had that 2016 SATS paper, the reading one, that kind of really threw everyone's results. And people really, I mean, if I'm honest, before then, the kind of idea of a daily reading lesson, I mean, regardless of what the content was, it kind of wasn't there for me in any of the schools I'd worked in. And from what I could tell, it wasn't in a lot of schools as well. It seemed to be the watershed moment when people started thinking, hang on, there might be some teaching we can do here around reading. And so I did quite a lot of reading of research, particularly around that point, around how we might be able to teach reading. And I have to say, like, going back, there are certain things that we did back then to try to address that issue that I wouldn't do anymore, and that, we didn't do, for example, at my last school. Thinking in terms of things like content domain and so on, and allowing that to shape the whole kind of process. But I was kind of blogging along with what I was doing, for reasons that we'll probably discuss later, really. And people were interested in that, so I think that helped with the popularity as well. Whether I need to go back and kind of say, actually, what I said back then is not quite what I think anymore, I'm not sure. But yeah, I think combination of positivity and kind of practicality was perhaps what drew people in.
That's what being a teacher is, though, isn't it? We don't teach now the way we did year one. We think about our practice, we refine our practice, and then we continually repeat that process over time. So if anyone were to hold you to things you said in 2015, I think they'd need to be honest with themselves. That maybe that's not how the world really works.
Yeah, I think so. And it's part of that reflective process, which is one of the most important parts of being a teacher, really, isn't it? Being reflective and then being responsive to what you've found out.
I mean, our plan is to go for 20 years and do maybe 948 episodes, I think it is, if you do one every week in that period. I can't imagine what 50-year-old me is going to think about what I've said.
It's not worth thinking about, is it?
No,
Who knows? Who knows what's going to change?
I mean, you were saying there about how some people had sort of voiced objections, and I don't know if I'm stepping on the toes of later questions, but like, how did you deal with that? Because that's not something I've encountered much, but I do know that when I do encounter it, it takes up all of my day thinking about it and trying to suppress those sort of, the fact that this isn't necessarily the most important thing in the world.
Yep, that's the same with me. I'm a massive perfectionist, and I think a lot of teachers are, and I think it's what makes us good at the job in many ways. But I just worry about it and think. I am always open to changing my mind, changing my opinion, and hopefully being honest about that when it happens. But it can really get to you, and you think. You question yourself first and foremost if you're a decent person. But then if you kind of get past that, there were times when I just thought, well, I just feel really sorry for that person, because I am trying to be helpful, I'm trying to be useful, I'm not trying to point the finger in any way. I'm just trying to say what I've found to work for me. And I know everyone's situation is different, and that's why I would never say well, this is an absolute must for everybody. I know everything is contextual, but yeah, it can be quite disheartening. And for something which is just a little hobby and something which you just do on the side and maybe do it for a bit of fun, or maybe do it because you have a desire to help people, it can be a bit disappointing, and probably disproportionately so. Because I think you put something of yourself out there, and it is hard to deal with. And I think when it's devoid of the kind of the rest of human interaction, because it's all online and because things can be misconstrued and because people come with their own kind of misconceptions and kind of, like I say, their own context, you just don't really know how anything, whether it's a tweet or a blog, how it's going to be received. You can never really be sure, no matter how much time you spent trying to say it the best way, because everyone's different and communication is two-sided. It's so much about the interpretation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The amount of editing I did when I first started this to make sure that it was as balanced as possible, and then it gets interpreted on purpose in the wrong way sometimes, and I might as well just put it out the way we originally intended and go from there, But but like I've been fortunate, that 99% of the time, people understand the spirit in which the message is sort of sent across.
Yeah, I think it was definitely the case that it was more well received than not. So you just have to try and see it in the balance, don't you?
Yeah. I mean, you need someone messaging going, remember all those nice things people said, or a little reminder on your phone.
I'm terrible at doing that.
Yeah.
Well, always focusing on what could be better.
So, I mean, I think it almost ties in to where I was going with my next question. I mean, were there any unintended consequences to your rising profile, and how did you cope?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I mean, I think in the next question you've used the word celebrity, and it doesn't feel like that at all. It's just, for some reason, a crazy number of followers on Twitter. I don't understand it really, but anyway, so I can't remember how far back we go in terms of being in a network on Twitter, but initially I started off completely anonymous, and I think I had, I can't remember. I think I was like Mr. Teacher at That Boy Can Teach or something. My blog back then was actually called Why I've Stayed in Teaching, because it was a bit of a response to all the Why I've Left Teaching articles that were going around at the time. And I was totally anonymous. I was in this assistant head job, and I was kind of blogging away about all this stuff I was doing, partly not because I didn't want people to know or I was ashamed. I was just aware that, people put this kind of disclaimer, personal views on their Twitter bio or whatever. I just didn't, not that I was intending to say anything against anyone or anything bad. I just didn't want something to be misconstrued and then for it to come back on me, to come back on my employers, and to potentially jeopardize my job. So that's why I was kind of incognito, but that started getting really hard as well. So one thing was that I was approached by TES to write some stuff, and it started to feel like, well, this is going really public. People who I know could very conceivably read this stuff and maybe start identifying or starting to think, hang on, that sounds familiar. And I think that was at the point that I told my boss, the head at the time, and also the CEO of the trust. I think she spoke to him about it, just because it was going in TES and they put a little bio and how much should I identify myself and things as well. But there were two other things. One was that I was starting to have nightmares about being found out. Again, even though I wasn't doing anything particularly wrong, it was just actually quite hard to maintain the kind of, not a fake persona. I still believe I was being myself, but just to maintain the secrecy, I suppose. So that was a catalyst. And then the third thing was that I went on some training, some reading training with another local trust, and they started flashing up all my stuff on the screen and saying, go check this out, use this, have a look at this. And I was sitting in the room thinking, that's all mine. I didn't care about them sharing it. That's why I put it out there. But it just felt really ridiculous, basically, that I was being told to do stuff that I'd created by someone else. So I think, yeah, those three things kind of work together for me to, yeah, put my profile picture up there, put my real name to it. Although I only switched to my real name as a handle probably in the last year, I think. I can't remember when that was. I don't know if that really answers your question, but my experiences have been very much kind of shaped by the fact that I was anonymous first, and that's kind of what springs to mind when I think about what the difficulties have been. Otherwise, having that many followers doesn't really make a difference to anything.
I can see what you mean, because I mean, I've read quite a lot about espionage, and particularly the sort of post-war period, and lots of the main players, particularly those who joined the KGB at a young age, they turned to alcoholism very, very quickly because of the pressure of maintaining their other identity. You know, obviously that's a very, very extreme situation.
Yeah,
but I can imagine
I've
there would
heard
be
some
mental
terrible stories. Yeah, about undercover policemen and things like that, and how difficult it is to kind of maintain those two lives, basically. And I think it did start to feel a bit like that, even though it sounds really ridiculous. But I think it was just because things were getting out there that I'd done, and it's not that I wanted to claim them or I didn't want anyone to use them. It was just difficult to manage that secrecy. And people did find out as well. So one of the teachers who I was working at the time apparently knew for a very long time, and then on the day I left, she kind of gave me a Lego Batman, because one of the blog posts that Emma Kell put it in one of her books actually was "Teachers Be More Batman." So she was kind of subtly referencing the fact that she knew, and she'd worked it out because things sounded very familiar that I was writing about. So yeah, it was getting out there anyway.
I remember that post. I remember talking to you on a Sunday morning about it. About the psychology of Batman. Can't remember the exact details of the psychology of Batman, but it was an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Did you find any additional pressure? You know, say you had maybe 30,000 followers, probably more than that in the end, or currently. Was there extra pressure on what you said and your tweets and things?
Yeah, well, I definitely I tried to be careful with what I say. And there's been some situations, I think mostly not anything to do with education at all, where I've kind of said something very uninformed and not thinking, and it's kind of really come back on me. And those are the days when you just have this sick feeling in your in the pit of your stomach, and you just think, why did I put that? Why did I say that? So I think I've gradually learned kind of to really be careful about what you put out there, and that's my main strategy. Don't put it out if it might have that sort of comeback. I don't have the kind of strength to put it out there anyway and say I don't care about what people are going to say.
Social media feels like it brings all the negatives of celebrity. You know, I'm not equating social media presences to celebrity, but there are a lot of negatives in that particular world. You know, but without the financial reward. You know, because if I'm earning millions of pounds, well, people can say what they want because I can just relax in my mansion with my pool and, you know, let it rub off my back. But actually, we're in classrooms, we're in schools, and we're working one of the hardest jobs possible. You know, so do you have a set of guiding principles for engaging with social media in a healthy and positive way? I think it almost ties up everything we've sort of discussed so far.
Yeah, I reckon there's 6 things, and I think we've kind of mentioned some of them. First thing is, don't tweet too much, and I think that automatically reduces the chances of things coming back to you. One, because you're not just putting out whatever comes to your head at that moment. Two, because you're not kind of sitting there always checking it, which there were definitely times in my life where I was kind of glued to my phone, always ready, always trying to respond. And I think that's when my follow account did grow, because I think the algorithms kind of favour that type of interaction. I don't think it's grown significantly for years now, my account, because now I just don't have time for that. And I deliberately try not to do too much. So yeah, don't tweet too much. That's the first step. Second one is don't enter into existing fights, which there are always, they're always happening on Twitter, and they're always about the same sorts of things. They're always things that, yes, of course I have an opinion on, but no, I'm not going to wade in and try and change people's minds, because I've rarely seen that actually happen. I don't think, despite, still tweeting and still blogging and so on, I don't think Twitter's the place where people go to have their minds changed. It's where they go to say what's on their mind. So yeah, don't get into existing fights. Like I've said, third one, don't be too controversial. I think because, again, as I've said, social media is so devoid of the whole range of human interaction, or the features of human interaction. So much gets taken in the wrong way, and I think I'm quite happy to be controversial, but on a personal one-to-one level, and it's not even about being controversial, it's about saying what you think to be true. And yes, I'll do that one-to-one personally in a situation where people can really understand what I'm saying and what I mean, where I can clarify if I need to, where they can come back, where they can read my body language and see that I'm not being antagonistic, I'm just saying what I think is true. So yeah, I just really try to avoid that on Twitter. And sometimes I probably do put something out and then I'm like, no, delete that before anyone sees it, before anyone can come back to it. So yeah, that's the third one. The fourth one is I really do use those features of Twitter where you can mute certain words. So you'd probably laugh if you could see my muted word list. There's things on there that relate to Line of Duty, because I didn't want spoilers. There's things on there related to politics, because I just see too much of it. And then there are things on there relating to education. So my latest one, and this might make no sense in October whatsoever, but I have muted unmet needs and behaviour, because I just can't see any more of that. So yeah, I'd use those, and I do occasionally use the kind of mute or block features if I've had repeat kind of run-ins with certain people who I can kind of see, right, I know what your agenda is here. It's kind of to come along and railroad and bully, so I don't need that, and I believe that it's my right to do that. I still have a very diverse range of opinions coming through on my feed. I deliberately try to listen to voices from all over the place, but I'm not willing to listen to people who can't deliver that message in a respectful way. So they get blocked or muted or whatever, depending on the severity. Fifth one is, if things do kick off, and they do, is to just try and be the bigger person as you would in real life, really. I think no matter how much you try to avoid stuff, there will always be things will always happen that make you feel unhappy, basically. And it's about just trying to be polite, trying to be kind, and just walking away from it. And then the sixth one is and probably one I'm not that good at, although I do intend to do it a bit this summer, is to just have time away from it as well. And to kind of say, right, yeah, I'm not really going to get involved at all for a couple of weeks, just to get your head out of it. 'Cause it sounds so sad, doesn't it? But it can draw you in, and it's designed to be addictive. If you understand the design principles behind social media, it is designed to get you hooked, and cleverly uses what your interests and kind of hobbies are to do that. So yeah, time away from it if you can. I was a no smartphone person in the past, but the lockdown changed that, because it was just impossible to really stay in touch with people properly when we weren't seeing people in real life. So I try to limit the use in various ways. So yeah, those are my six ways to survive social media.
Sometimes we have people who listen to the podcast, maybe they'll find it through Apple or Spotify, and then they'll join Twitter and they'll message and say, "Oh yeah, really enjoy the podcast." I think this will be invaluable for them because I'm thinking about all the times I've done the opposite of your advice. And I mean,
all of those bits of advice come from mistakes I've made. Yeah,
I had a 3210 for a while, but I missed a couple of important phone calls because the signal just wasn't on the same level. Yeah. And I thought, okay, all right, I'm going to bite the bullet, but I will turn my phone off. And I mean, like certainly in the evening times, I try not to use it at all. And although we're going to be releasing this in October, after I've recorded a string of episodes for season 5, I'm going away to Norfolk for 2 weeks, or Norfolk for a week, and then Ireland for a week. And in that time,
nice,
very, very reduced. Mostly because the signal will enforce it, but also because I think nothing's going to be missed. I can send out my Saturday morning tweet.
Yeah.
If someone has a question, they'll still be there when I get back.
Yeah, they will. And you're just not. You're not beholden to any of these people as much as you've got these relationships with people online, and you might have met some of them in real life. It's not normal. It's not natural life to kind of have thousands of people kind of at your beck and call, or vice versa. And I just think, you just got to step back and do normal life a bit sometimes. And you don't owe anyone anything online.
At the minute, I'm blocking anyone who has an advertisement, so companies, because Twitter has completely changed, and it's just basically what Facebook used to be, with lots of advertisements. I'm going to block that company, block that company, and eventually there'll be no companies left to advertise to me.
The new thing is, you click on a tweet, don't you? And you scroll down to see the replies, and the first thing is an advert. Yeah. Like that's just started, and it's so frustrating. It's always something that I don't care about either. So they've obviously not got the algorithms right on that yet. It's usually about games to play on your phone, which is just not something I will ever do.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting how long we can continue like that if the user experience is watered down, But we'll see. But I think those are solid pieces of advice, guiding principles that can help anyone, and hopefully they will help people avoid sort of extended periods of discomfort because of interactions on social media, because there's so much great stuff to get on it. I think I joined in 2016 and got lucky that I started following people with fantastic blogs, fantastic sort of outlooks on education, things that most schools are talking about now in 2022. Those conversations were happening, and so I felt like, oh yeah, this is fantastic. I've had like early access to the best that's been thought, So I think it's not to say that it's completely negative, but I do think that we need to be careful because we are patient zero in this great experiment, where we don't know what social media is like. We've lived before the internet. We're living as the internet grows, so there's been no rigorous testing of what the impact might be. If we can slightly turn our attention to your blog writing process, and obviously you've been prolific in the past, you're still very prolific at the moment. From idea to publication, what was the process, and has it changed over time?
I think there are several processes depending on what is being written about, and I think perhaps it's not changed that much. As you mentioned before, I had written before I had an education blog, and that hip hop blog I had, I did prioritize writing. It was an exercise in creative writing for me, so it wasn't just let's put a video up or a song out there or whatever. I was trying to write well whilst doing that. And I think for me, it just turns out that one of the ways that I geek out about the things that I'm into is by writing about it. And I think, I'm pretty sure I've started other blogs at other times as well that perhaps haven't taken off so much, but that's just one thing that I seem to like to do. But yeah, I think the process has always been fairly similar. And I think there are a couple at least processes that I do go through. And Doug Lemov's got a really good blog post about 3 different kinds of writing in the classroom, and 2 of them are really relevant to how I've written a blog. So he's got formative writing and summative writing, and I can't remember what the third one is, but that's the one that's not relevant. So the formative writing is one where I'm using the writing process to help me learn more about the thing that I'm trying to find out about, whether that's learning more from, for example, a piece of research, or whether that's learning more about what I think myself. Actually putting, sometimes I do sometimes handwrite my blogs. If I'm out and about and I've got my notebook and pen, which I nearly always have, then I'll scribble it out. But otherwise it's just straight onto the computer, or even into my phone. I've got plenty of notes of full blog posts that I've then copied over. But yeah, it helps me to make sense of what I've been reading. It helps me to make sense of what I've been thinking, that I perhaps, if somebody asked me to try and explain it in spoken word, I wouldn't be able to do. But that time spent formatively writing, by the end of the process, I kind of got down what I actually think about something. So I've been trying to do that quite a lot recently, about lots of things that over the years, whilst I've been teaching, I've just not had the time to write about, and just trying to capture the essence of something that I thought, and that people probably ask me, well, how do you do that? How do you make sure that, a certain thing happens in the classroom? And I'm like, I don't really know. And this is probably, David Weston talks about this sort of thing in terms of like a curse of expertise, that sometimes you just don't know how you know what you know, and you perhaps can't even explain it. So I think writing is a really good way for me to do that. It's something that I've certainly encouraged other people to do in the past, because I don't think it's kind of exclusive to certain people. I think probably most people could write in this sort of way, and it's kind of a reflection as well, a tool for reflection. And then the other form of writing is kind of summative writing. So something that you just know really well, and it's time to put it down on the page, and it's those ones that kind of just come very quickly, and you don't have to put too much thought into them because you've kind of done all the thinking. And there's not much more to say about those ones, other than in terms of a writing process, particularly for those ones, I will write in my head as I'm going about my daily business. Sometimes I'll make a note of phrases and things, but otherwise it's all just sitting there because I'm putting the words together in my head as I go along, and then it comes out onto the page. So I think quite a lot of my writing process is actually the thinking part, and that when I come down to put it on the page, it doesn't take much longer because I've already done that thinking. And I think that's it. I think that's all I do. In terms of the formative writing, it's not just the thinking that goes into it. It is usually a lot of reading as well, and trying to work out what on earth this research paper is actually saying to us. And yeah, sometimes I'll do them kind of alongside. So I'll take a quote from the text and then try and say what it's saying in writing, to help, as I said, to help me to understand. But yeah, I think otherwise I'll follow one of those 2 processes depending on what it is, and I've probably not changed too much. I think in the past I might have tried to make it, I probably worked harder in the past on making the writing kind of very, I don't know what the word is, just better. But now I'm more, I want to get it simple and I want to get it down. That's kind of more the priority now.
That's amazing. I mean, sometimes, like, say I'm invigilating SATs, I'll plan out presentations in my head, like have imaginary slideshows, because you can't do anything. So why not just prep this? But I've never tried writing something solely in my mind, so I'm going to try that.
Yeah, do it. And the other thing I have done actually is using the the voice dictation thing on my phone. So one particular thing, which was actually not a blog, although it is a blog post now, it was like a speech. I wrote it by speaking it, and the phone just recorded it all, and then I went back and edited it. And I did it walking around the woods near my house, and now whenever I walk around those woods, I remember what I was saying at various points, like Sherlock Holmes' mind palace type thing. It's like these visual reminders. That tree reminds me that I said that thing. But it really helped me when I delivered the speech, because I was kind of on this mental walk, and I was able to remember what came next because of that. It was very strange. It's not something I've fully explored, but I've done it once, and it was a kind of interesting experience.
Yeah, because people who do that really well seem to make it look really easy, don't they? But I reckon there's a lot of prep goes into that kind of situation.
Yeah, definitely.
How do you write about things that you see? Are you reacting in real time, or do you think, okay, over the next period I want to talk about this because this is the message I've got to share?
It's a bit of both, and I think more recently it's become more deliberate in terms of what kind of services I want to try and sell to people. I will be open and honest about that. Most of the time, like if you knew the work that I'd been doing in a school or in my job, you would recognise everything in that blog post from being something that I've experienced. I kind of feel, well, if I've dealt with this, then I might as well record it so that it might help other people. I think it's probably kind of a way of processing certain things that have gone on, and particularly in terms of that formative kind of writing, it's about learning new things as well. But yeah, it's mostly taken from what's going on. I don't really have time to be trying to write other things that aren't like the things that are on my mind anyway. I've got a couple of lists of kind of future blog posts and things that I could write, but most of the time it's kind of inspired by the work that I'm doing with a particular school, and I'll just write down what I'm doing. And for example, the one that I published this week is because I'm prepping that stuff for next year for a school, and I actually needed to go through that process to think about what I was going to put into that kind of CPD content.
There's certainly the blogs I'm most interested in reading, those ones that have that direct link to things that are happening in the classroom. Not that others aren't interesting, but I think, there's an element to which you want to know how this works on the ground, or what someone else has thought, so that you can sort of build on that in your own practice.
Yeah. And even if you think I totally don't agree with that, you've then got, well, if I don't agree with that, then I probably think the opposite. So now I know what I think. So it'll help either way.
Yeah. Searching out for things that you don't agree with in longer form is definitely better than searching for 240 characters or 280 characters, whatever it might be. And I think if someone's taken time to write a blog post and you still don't agree, well then, perhaps it's not meant to happen. But at least you've sort of taken the time to give it due consideration. And so you almost mentioned, you're, like I said, being very honest. You want to try and guide people towards your new endeavor, which I think is fair, because that's the way the world works. And also you've got a message to share. So I think it'd be really interesting, because the things that have stood out for me on sort of social media, the conversations around subject leadership and sort of the things you've been trying to do to engage subject leaders, who I think are typically underserved in terms of the professional development that is on offer to them. What would your guiding principles for subject leadership be?
Yeah, so I think there's so much to say about subject leadership, and I think I initially started out by doing a kind of half-day thing with a little snippet of this, that and the other, and as I've gone along, it's just grown into this huge list of things that I think subject leaders need to know about and need to be able to do. And I think, we all know why subject leaders have got this kind of increased responsibility, and I don't think we've actually mentioned. Oh no, we did mention them, but Ofsted. And have kind of placed this responsibility on subject leaders, and I actually think it's right. I don't think it all should sit with the head teacher or the kind of senior leaders at the top end of it, as it were, and that actually it's all about what everybody knows within the school, and that, yeah, if you're a subject leader, then you have got a job to do. But there's a lot to it. So I think I've kind of come up with 4 things, but probably on another day I would come up with a different 4 things. And maybe this is just a reflection of what I'm thinking about the most. Maybe it's just a summary of all the different schools I've worked with on this and what their key kind of considerations have been. So the first thing, and I only realised this really recently, is that I would really want to encourage subject leaders that they aren't a leader of a subject, but they are a leader of a team of people teaching that subject. Because I think, kind of coming from the past, you know, I told you that I was an art leader in my RQT year, and then for, I think, 4 years after that. My role then was not really much to do with the people. It was to do with the kind of practicalities. It was more of an administration role than leadership. So, for example, I completed the Art Smart Gold application, 60 whatever pages. That took up loads of my time. I made sure that, you know, year 4 had enough clay for their art project, and that there was enough sugar paper in the drawers, and that those drawers were tidied like every day, because those paper drawers always need tidying. Like, that was what I was kind of concerned with back then. But the role has changed so much, and what we need to think about is the fact that, well, we're leading people in teaching these subjects, and therefore our leadership has to kind of focus around, to put it crudely, getting those teachers to teach your subject well. Without kind of seeing those teachers as part of your team, it becomes a much more difficult job. When you start to see subject leadership as a leadership role that concerns a team of people, you start to think differently, and you start to think, okay, so these people need to know what my priorities are. They need to know what the strengths and weaknesses are. And I think sometimes we want to hold back on those things because it feels like you're pointing the finger at your mates, basically. You know, we need to improve this in art because you lot aren't teaching it. And that can feel very personal. But I think a team approach where you're open and honest is going to get you a lot further. So yeah, you're not leading a subject, you're leading people in teaching that subject. I think the second thing is that you just need to know you can't do it all at once. And I think as senior leaders who've seen more of leadership, you know that really well, probably from making the mistake of trying to do too much at once. But as a subject leader, where there's this competition really for time and for who does what and when, you've just got to be really realistic and see that not everything can be done. So you might have a subject and you might know, well, we need to do X, Y, and Z, but actually think only X is possible in this year. And I was listening to an episode, and it's Lloyd. He's written about it since in a magazine, I think, hasn't he? About this process of thinking what you need to do now and then what's going to be kind of on the back burner for later. And I think subject leaders really need to get their heads around that. I think it's important that you can say, well, we're focusing on this now because we think this is the priority because of whatever the reason is. But we also know there are some other things that need changing, but they can't be done now. It's not realistic. However, next year or in 3 years, we plan to tackle that. And in terms of Ofsted, it's about being able to really clearly articulate how you've prioritised and why you've prioritised those things, and to show them as well that you do know what the other things are that need doing, but that they just can't be done yet. I think in terms of subject leadership and not doing it all at once, you also have to consider that every other subject leader's got their priorities, and getting a bit of collaboration in there. So thinking about how you will stagger your implementation to make sure that that teachers aren't trying to start all these new things in all these subjects all at once. So maybe kind of sharing it out across the year a bit more. Yeah, cooperating and planning together. The third thing is about giving teachers what they need. Now, this is really contextual. Some teachers in some schools might not need that much from their subject leader. It might depend on which subject it is. And that, again, would depend on the strengths within the staff team in your school. But I do think if you want teachers to teach things well, then think about the resources that you provide for them. So do you need to go down to sort of medium term unit overview level? In week 1 you teach this content, in week 2 you teach this. Do you need to go down to the level of actually saying, this is a really good website for that part of the sequence, this is a really good activity for that part of the sequence, kind of putting things there for them to make sure that you are supporting them in the teaching of that subject. Again, in the past, I think that's kind of stopped at the resource level, particularly more practical creative subjects. You kind of think, well, yeah, you know, all the paintbrushes are there, all the vices and saws are there, all the little bulbs and batteries are there, so you just get on and do it. But I do think that as subject leaders, we can, it's not about being more directive and saying you must do this. It's about putting the support in place and putting the things there that teachers need to be able to do a good job. And then I think that the fourth thing I would say is just that you can make a difference and you can make changes, and that although time always seems like a barrier, there are ways around it. And I think it sounds a bit rubbish really, but having that positive kind of optimistic mindset will help you to find the ways to get things done. And so I just encourage subject leaders that they can do stuff, they can make a difference.
I think that's really important, because sometimes it can feel like you're just floating in the middle, but in really effective schools, you know, you'd be driving things forward, and it's definitely worth the time investment. I mean, like yourself, maybe not exactly the same. In my second year, I became RE lead. You had a background in art, so that put you at a slight advantage. Yeah. My limited experience of religious education was very narrow because of where I'd grown up and the context and things. What would you suggest to people who end up in that situation where they're leading a subject and they don't know much about it?
Yeah, well, I think subject knowledge is key. I don't think you can be a very effective subject leader without knowing enough about your subject. And that is a bit of a difficult message, really, because it does mean quite a lot of work on your part. But I would say if you're a subject leader in that position, then your number one priority, if you're thinking about action plans and what you need to do in the next year, then your priority should be you and your own subject knowledge. And there's, you know, the subject kind of content knowledge, there's kind of pedagogical knowledge as well that's specific to your subject. There's the kind of old sort of keeping up with changes in your subject thing, which is kind of gets on teacher standards and things like that. But yeah, I would prioritise that as something which needs to be, which underpins everything, because how can you monitor your subject if you don't know it? How can you improve your subject if you don't know it? So I would say prioritise that. And I think there's plenty of resources out there as well that can help you as a subject leader to improve your subject knowledge. So you've got subject association memberships, which come with journals and often kind of free online CPD and things. I know Mary Myatt's putting together these kind of subject leader group, online sessions. I think the kind of wealth of kids books out there now, that non-fiction books around the subjects and usually quite specific to the national curriculum content, because the publishers know that that's what's going to sell. And then actually going as far as, you know, watch some documentaries about whatever it is, history, geography, read some kind of grown-up books about your subject, find out more, because I think, although I think it's really important to read stuff at the kids' level, it often doesn't give you the bigger picture, and how things connect together. So I'm thinking, for example, history, you might get these isolated facts about your Anglo-Saxon kings and so on, but without a greater understanding of the context of the time, which you will only get through reading more adult kind of facing stuff. You might not quite understand the subject as well as you could. Things like podcasts as well, again, thinking about the teaching of my subject and also the more general content. There's so much out there now that's kind of like get it on your headphones on the way to work or playing through the car audio system or whatever, that you can pick up a lot by doing that. But yeah, I think the main message to that person would be prioritise it and kind of stand your ground if someone questions that.
Yeah, I think that's going to be invaluable advice, because I reckon it's quite a common occurrence. You're talking about podcasts. I mean, I must have 3 or 4 history podcasts on the go at the minute, soaking up all these periods of history that I had no idea about, because it just wasn't. There's not enough time in school to learn about all these things, is there? I think it's probably worth saying that Adam Smith put our subject knowledge compendium episode into a Notion workbook, which is some sort of software that works per personal organization, but you can make really detailed notes. So if anyone's interested in that for their subject knowledge, he's taken that episode and making it something even greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing as well. There's people on Twitter who have that real speciality. So yeah, I would go to him if I was thinking about something to do with RE, or Stuart Tiffany if I was thinking about history or whatever. There's certain people who know their stuff on social media. So another plug for social media and its positive benefits. I would always recommend subject leaders kind of find those people because they're so generous with their time and thoughts and the things they share as well.
What do you have planned for subject leaders in the new academic year?
So I'm working with various schools and trusts on a more prolonged kind of sequence of CPD, really, that I've matched to the points in the year and the kind of times when you need to be doing certain things to make sure that you are developing your subject, make sure that you're kind of analysing, reflecting, getting towards the end of the year, being ready for the next year, and so on. So, yeah, I'm building quite a lot of content around how to be a subject leader, kind of not day to day, but half term to half term. I think you can often get really good advice, but at the wrong time, when you don't get to put it into practice. So I'm really trying to kind of match the seasons with what I'll be delivering to these various schools and trusts. And to make it really practical, really, so that those sessions that people do attend, they actually come away from that having done part of the work, because I'm so aware of the fact that, they might go away and not ever get another hour to do something. So those sessions themselves need to be really productive in terms of not only what input you get from me as somebody who's kind of done that process a few times, but also kind of making your own plans and making your own decisions and having time to think things through. Yeah, simply because you might just not get that time elsewhere.
If your guiding principles or anything to go by, I'm sure it'd be very, very high quality. So that sounds awesome. And so, what does the future hold for Aidan Severs? What are you looking to over the next 12 months?
Okay. Well, the next 12 months, again, honestly, I hope I get enough work to be able to carry on doing this. I've absolutely loved my first 7 months. I'm so thankful to the schools who kind of taken a punt, really, because they've had a few blogs and things to go on, but otherwise I was an unknown quantity. But yeah, I've got lots of exciting things kind of booked in already. I'm doing some stuff with some of the MPQs, some ECT and ECT mentor things, potentially some fairly big writing commitments, but I'm not sure about that at the moment. I mean, probably by the time this goes out, I'll know one way or the other. But then, yeah, getting into schools, because it is being in schools, and that is the thing I love. You know, my favourite days are the ones where I get to go in, I get to kind of orientate myself to the context of the school, I get to speak to leaders, I get to think about, like, alongside them with what their kind of presenting issues are, to do that problem solving process, to bring my experience, to bring what I know from research and all of that sort of thing, and to kind of work out what the solutions are and then start helping them to build. That's what I love doing, being with people, kind of tussling with the real issues, and so far, and hopefully kind of coming to a place where they're ready to take that on themselves. What I don't want to do is create any sort of dependency. It is about skilling people up as you go along, and I suppose helping to generate the confidence to be able to do it themselves, because, you know, schools need to be not self-contained necessarily, but yeah, everything should be a CPD opportunity, I think. So I'm hoping that I get to do some more of that alongside the CPD kind of things that I've mentioned as well. So the plan is just to carry on with that for now.
Excellent. Well, I mean, fingers crossed it goes well. I'm sure it will. I mean, it seems to have been a really successful first 7 months. You know, it takes a lot of bravery, especially post-pandemic, to make that move. But yeah, I hope you continue to go from strength to strength.
Thank you.
I mean, it's been wonderful talking to you today, Aidan. You know, I think hopefully this won't be the last time. Hopefully you'll come back and join us for some of the chats, because, you know, normally when I do long form interviews, and then those people get sucked into the panel of people who give me their Wednesday nights.
Happy to. Yeah. I mean, it might mean that I've got fewer things to listen to on my commute, but yeah, happy to.
Yeah, Chris Such doesn't listen back to episodes that he features in. I don't know if it's...
Oh, no, I couldn't. I've never... No.
Yeah, the thing was, he was supposed to be quality assuring them at one point, so who knows what happened to those episodes.
All the ones I've heard have been good.
I think all that's left to do is say thank you very much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me. I've loved it.